Okay, welcome back to The Social Wildlife. Today on the show I have Hamish Mertens. He's a personal trainer based in Christchurch, New Zealand. Hamish, who has navigated life with ADHD, was diagnosed at a young age and faced the challenges of being medicated through his school years. In many ways, this not only impacted his academic journey, but also his identity and his relationships. Despite these obstacles, Hamish has transformed his ADHD into a strength, channeling his energy and focus into a successful career in the fitness industry. As a personal trainer, Hamish has developed a passion for helping others unlock their potential, all while continuing to manage the unique ups and downs of ADHD. Today we'll dive deep into his experiences growing up, how medication shaped his early life, and how he's learned to harness his ADHD to build a thriving business. We'll also explore the critical lessons he's learned about resilience, personal growth, and the real strengths that come with having ADHD. Hamish, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
No worries, man. I just thought I'd start with a quick question about when you were diagnosed. So just wondering what that process was like for you as a child and how did it affect your understanding of yourself at the time?
It would have been around sort of 5 or 6, those early years of primary.
Right.
And in that, I just remember it was regarding sort of reports back from teachers.
Yep.
And clear areas that were undeveloped and needed to work on.
Right.
And then going to like a psychology office and having a psychologist kind of run some tests.
Yeah.
That I didn't really understand. Yeah.
Do you remember the tests at the time, what they were like?
No. So I remember it feeling very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I remember wondering why I was there.
Yeah.
I remember, not being on board with the process. It was, yeah.
So when you say uncomfortable, is it like emotionally uncomfortable just doing the tests? Is that right? Or
Yeah, well, like I think as a child, you tend to, you have an understanding that when you get sick or very sick, you might need to see a doctor.
Yeah, true.
And you have those processes that going through.
Yeah, yeah.
And so when you feel like everything is okay with your health and you're having to see a specialist, you don't really know why.
You'd be like, why am I here?
Yeah, why am I here?
Yeah.
Why am I doing this?
Yeah.
What have I done?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so do you remember what the school reports were mostly like? Or do you have any memories of being at school and what the issues were?
Yeah, so some that come to mind was that like very friendly, very outgoing, gets along with others really well, disruptive on tasks that aren't interested in, loses focus easily, great at physical sports, not so much in paying attention in groups, struggles to listen, stuff like that.
Yeah, it sounds like my school reports. I mean, like I don't know, I didn't really excel at sports, but I know that like the teachers always said like I was polite, well-mannered, well-spoken, like wasn't disrespectful, just didn't stay on task, was disruptive with other students, like bang on. And I, my desk was at the whiteboard by the halfway through the year, like just under it. Yeah. So that was kind of what you kind of prompted your parents to take you to and go through that review process.
I believe so. It might have even been like a few steps further with teachers and parents. Yeah. In terms of like when they have to come into school to have like sit downs. Yeah. And they could have potentially referred me on. I know that very early on I struggled with speech, and so I had to go to like Kit McGrath and learn about how to pronounce words properly.
I see.
And it was funny, like my father, who I absolutely loved to death, but he definitely taught me like that fish were osh and like sheep were barbars and like,
oh really?
So like different names to pronounce things early on, which probably didn't help. But when I went to a speech coach, that sort of put me on an even playing field.
Yep. Yeah. No, fair enough. I kind of had the opposite. My dad was always on my case about words, like certain words. If I got them wrong, he'd keep getting me to say them. And like, for example, Hanmer, Springs. Yeah. Everyone says Hamner, right? With an M at the M first. And nowadays he does it. And I'm like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
Like, you corrected me on that my whole life, right? And now you're doing it wrong.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, no, I understand that. I was I was good at science, so like when we had the science competitions that came in and things, and English was one of my stronger things, but maths, I was terrible. I still can't. If you got me to subtract 3 numbers from 3 numbers, I'd still have to do it on paper.
This as well, because we're completely different in the sense that numbers made sense to me.
Right, yeah.
It was like really easy to understand, work on timetables, try and like figure out what it meant. But when it came to like grammar and pronunciation and English, I was great at the ideas part of making up a story.
Yep.
But I really struggled with putting that onto paper and just words didn't make sense and the order that they would go in.
Isn't it funny? You can have the same underlying condition that drives the focus and attention, but then different strengths and weaknesses in certain areas that are actually almost secondary.
For sure, and I think that speaks a lot to the individual and like what you find interesting.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
And and a little bit of that overlapping is from having dyslexia, being dyslexic.
Yeah, right, true.
In terms of like the order in which commas and what type of there you would use in words.
So, and the English language is so complex.
Sure.
Like I remember recently we were teaching Flynn that it's phonics, and you're talking about like how certain things appear, and it's like there's like 3 or through OUGH words. They can all sound so different. There's 5 different ways to pronounce OUGH.
For sure.
Know what I mean? And it's like, imagine trying to learn that as an adult, as a second language. You'd be like, why would you spell this the same?
International students really struggle. It just doesn't make sense.
And so dyslexia, I'm not really familiar with what dyslexia. I know it's to do with speech, obviously, and is it to do with the order that words appear? Correct. And then how you read them? You might read them backwards or miss things out.
Yeah. So my understanding it's the order in which they appear in terms of like the letters and format.
Right.
In full sentences, you can miss words.
Right.
And you can be thinking the sentence, but you put down something. You miss things essentially in it. Yeah. And so like in texting format, especially when you don't think short term, when you're sending messages, that can be like problematic.
Oh yeah, true.
And for me, I know even today, like if I'm very tired, it's like diabolical. Yeah.
Did that come out when you started using a phone and texting or text messaging and things?
So that was diagnosed pretty early on.
So it was rectified as a kid, like
not really rectified, just understanding that it's an ongoing thing and something to be aware of.
I see. When I say come out, like when you started text. Because you would have been, how old are you?
34.
34. So you're only a few years younger than me. You still would have been of that era where text messaging cost 20 cents.
Yeah.
And you had a phone and that was all it did was text or called. So like back then it was way more efficient to send shorthand.
Yeah.
And did you notice your dyslexia at that time?
But probably because that would have been in my teenage years having a phone. And to be honest, I probably didn't recognize my mistakes in that. It was only when you sort of read back over something that you sent.
Yeah, of course. And people, do you know, like what you're describing, I reckon a lot of people, whether they're diagnosed with dyslexia or not, do that. Miss words out, do all that kind of shit. It's human nature. I think we just skip over things, we skim over stuff.
The weird thing is though, is if you're aware of the problem or when you do it, you feel like it, and a guilt or an embarrassment associated with it, as opposed to like it being like you're just tired human error.
True.
Like you're just going like, oh fuck, I did that. Like
you don't associate a disorder with it or a problem. Yeah.
Even though the person that you're sending to most likely doesn't really notice or mind if they can sort of make sense of what you're trying to say.
Yeah, that's right. So being diagnosed with it and understanding that it's an issue that you have almost makes it something that you take on as part of your identity that you're embarrassed of. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's frustrating. And I guess we'll get into that with ADHD too. It was something that you felt
yeah,
similar
for sure.
in that way as well.
And even with this conversation, like my intentions to highlight the strengths of ADHD and dyslexia and how people can be high functioning and do great things and be a pillar of truth for it rather than looking at it from an aspect of a disability. There are definitely weaknesses with it, but it's really interesting. Like on the drive over here and thinking about what we're going to talk about, I definitely felt some resistance of bringing this conversation up because there's a guilt or shame associated with it being a disability rather than being like open and honest and having a clear conversation. It feels like it's almost damaging because you want to keep it hidden.
Yeah. I think it's a really powerful statement, honestly. I think that there's probably a lot of people out there that feel the way you do about it. And it's interesting too, we just touched on it a wee bit earlier, but I'm on the other side of it where I haven't had it as a stigma throughout my youth.
Yeah.
And now having it, it's almost like, oh, this is something I've discovered about myself.
For sure.
I'm trying to bring it into awareness almost, and like,
well, the conversation around it has changed so much.
I know. Yeah.
Where like it's almost, people potentially wear it as a badge to be like, I'm this, or this is neurodivergence, or like, oh, I've got symptoms of this. People talk about it very blasé.
Yeah.
It's there's a lot of apps out there that can self-diagnose you without sort of seeing a psychologist.
Yeah.
So I feel like it's well talked about today, and it's very much in the ethos.
Yep.
But I really want for people to see it from a positive light and the strength that come with it, as opposed to like I feel like there's two conversations that take place currently online. So one is people talk about it jokingly, like what it's like to have ADHD, doing like your laundry,
I've seen
or like
those.
memes and all the rest of it, or conversations and where they sort of go. And then the second arm to that is you have people in like white coats in university. You have psychologists that sort of speak very monotoned about it, and it being like a very real problem. So it'll be really cool for people to also speak about the strengths of it and how people can sort of harness that and live a successful life.
It's like bridging that gap, because you've got ADHD in pop culture, and then you've got ADHD in medical science. And it's like, where is the gap where the communication can go on between those two places?
For sure.
And show where those strengths are.
Because like so much within placebo is, if you think something is working, it'll work. And if we have a positive mindset around something that we really have, and we focus on those strengths, that's very empowering. And I think that's important that some people take away from this conversation.
There's a guy, I think it's, I've got his audiobook, and I'd probably say his name wrong. I think it's Gabor Mate.
Okay.
Dude. I think it's he says his name. I'll have to double check. And apologies to anyone who knows him well, or knows his stuff well, because I've probably said that wrong. But his book is basically saying that he thinks or believes that ADHD is, and it's very popular, this book, he believes ADHD is not genetic. He thinks it's learnt, and it's something that comes from very, very early childhood. And I want to work to understand that, because I think everything else points to it being genetic, or that it's something inherent. And he thinks it can be kind of like taught out of people, unconditioned. Through like, I don't know what it would be, through reward and punishment, or conditioning. So stand by for that. I don't want to comment on it until I actually know more about it. But the book's had like 5,000 reviews. It's got 4.7 stars or something. So like, there's a lot of people have read it and must agree with it. But I also haven't heard anything on that side of things yet.
I have to check it out.
Yeah, I'll send you a link. Okay, cool. So many people diagnosed with ADHD as children are unsure about sharing it with others. How did you navigate telling your peers or teachers about your diagnosis, and how did you feel? Did you feel any pressure to keep it private?
So I think I can't speak to how my teachers found out. They probably would have. I'm sure there's like notes on students or people coming to your classroom, so they potentially see your folder or your files. When it came to my peers, I definitely didn't talk about it, and there was more of a shame or not wanting to share it, from the aspect not wanting to be different. I think it's a very human trait, wanting to be accepted and wanting to just be like a regular person, like everyone else. And so when you're having to have extra tutoring for the baseline, and you're having to take a drug daily and take sort of vitamins that are meant to help with cognition, and like fish pills and zinc for your brain and stuff like this. There's a shame with that. Like, you just want to be like a regular kid.
You feel less than.
So it wasn't something that I wanted to share. I wanted to have authentic relationships based on who I was and what I was about.
Yep.
And I definitely never spoke to my friends about it.
I guess the teachers would have been told through obviously when parents would go to the school and say, this is what we're dealing with now.
Yep.
And then if you had the extra tutoring and things, you can see how, and did you know anyone else at the time who had it?
So there was one kid in my school who was in a classroom. I went to Elmwood Primary, and I was diagnosed with ADD, attention deficit disorder.
Yep.
Now I understand it's ADHD, and there's arms of that, pathways.
Yep.
He at that time was diagnosed with ADHD, and that was really evident in terms of when he would have a meltdown or an emotional response, he would act very extreme.
Yep.
And there was like 2 or 3 cases I can recall with like hitting another student or like taking a pair of scissors and climbing up a tree or being on a camp in Hamner Springs and hitting someone, then running off into the forest and teachers looking for this kid. And so like knowing that you were in a similar league with that person was definitely not something that I wanted to sort of speak about at the time, because I'm like, fuck, I'm a normal kid. Like I don't want people to know about it.
It's almost like you'd be tarred with the same brush by students subconsciously. They would look at him having his meltdowns and then look at you and going like, when's he going to have his?
And it was only more like it was only more evident of it in like intermediate and high school, where like I was very aware of how the drugs made me. But when I was in primary school with Ritalin, I wasn't so. The thing that I can remember quite vividly is just not having any hunger, not having any appetite.
Yep.
So that's where like I grew up in a family environment where you weren't allowed to leave the table until you finish your meal. You shouldn't be wasteful. Kids in Africa that are starving, finish your meal.
Yeah, I've heard those ones.
It felt a long way away from the Havana, but like definitely with vegetables and stuff like this, you had to stay at the table until you finish your meal.
Yep.
And so that meant with going to school with a packed lunch, that if I had no appetite for it, I would feel like I'd be in trouble if I brought that food home or would ask questions. So I'd tend to just throw away my sandwiches. Yeah. Sorry, Mum.
Yeah.
And just run. Like literally, it was great. School had full contact. So ball rush, rugby, just the days where you would just go hard for your 60 minutes of lunch break, come back to the car room, a sweaty mess, covered in bruises and cuts and mud and stuff. And then you had to sit down again.
Right. Yeah. And do you think the medication helped with that? Was it?
The medication helped in the aspect of being able to sit through subjects that I had no interest in or didn't sort of like grow to.
Yep. Cool. So it kind of leads on to the next one. What was your experience like being medicated as a child for ADHD? How did it impact your ability to focus? Your school performance and your relationships with your friends and family? Yeah,
it's a really interesting question because as you grow up through different years of school, it affects you in a different way.
Yeah.
But definitely like early on, the earlier memories were that the appetite suppression, and it actually almost like encouraged sort of binge-like behavior when it came to food, because like if you're running around on your lunch break and your morning tea and you have no appetite throughout your day and you're expending all this energy and you get home from school in the afternoon, like you were just binging the Maggi noodles, the Raro, the cheese sandwiches.
Yep.
And then you're just going out and running again on like a full stomach.
Yeah, true.
And often like if you're feeling really full, you'd almost make it like you'd vomit, like because you just like you didn't understand why you were so hungry.
Yeah, true.
Because you've been on and something that has an appetite suppressant response, and you're expending all this energy, so your body suddenly cues your ghrelin. You feel these hunger cues to eat, and so you eat a large amount of food, and you go out and run, and that's just not productive. Like you almost want to throw up. So that was sort of like one earlier effect. I remember also being like in school, it was almost like you were a tamed sort of lion. in the sense of like you go to those zoos in Thailand and you see those people that are sitting next to
tigers.
That are sitting next to a tiger, patting them, and you've got this beast of animal that can solely run around free and is completely sort of seduced to its environment because it's tranquilized.
Yeah.
And that sort of comes to mind when I think about who I was in school. Like I had some great friendships, but I wasn't the same person at school as I was at like after school or weekends.
Yeah.
And so that kind of changed relationships, and relationships a little bit harder, especially in high school, because I guess people want a level of authenticity when it comes to relationships. And it was almost like I wasn't being authentic to my true self. It was kind of like subdued.
Yeah. Yeah. You can see how like, on your body, I mean, when you take methylphenidate or Ritalin, it's very similar to cocaine. Its chemical structure. It's like you're taking such a low dose, but it would increase the levels of dopamine, but also norepinephrine, which is adrenaline in your system. And then when adrenaline gets in your system, it dumps all your glycogen into your bloodstream for blood sugar. So you don't feel hungry, but your blood sugar's up. So you've got energy basically. And then when you start to come off it, start to come down, you get this crash, and it's like your body's like, oh my god, we need carbs. Yeah, like, and that would be you binging on your noodles and your Milo, and like everything. You'd be craving sugar like you wouldn't even believe. Yeah, and you'd be so hungry, and then you'd binge on it like you say, but then you'd have this almost like second wind.
Yeah, it was crazy because it was like working in the health industry for many years now. Like when I think about what I used to eat,
yeah, I know.
I'm just like I just survived on sugar.
Yeah, no cereal.
Like, and I was like an absolute addict for it. Like I would like jump on a bike and ride like 10 Ks to the nearest dairy to get like a slushie or like a dolly mixture. Like I had a real itch for it. And at home, like blue collar family. Parents, like you're allowed to sort of put one thing in the basket if you're lucky from the shopping list. Right, I see. Yeah. And so but cheaper things like Raro and Milo were sort of like staples. Yeah. And I would have like a 5-to-1 ratio of Milo to milk. Right. Yeah. Where it's just like the slurry of chocolate that you're like throwing down your neck, and then a Raro packet would get about like 100 to 200 mils in there if you're lucky, and that's meant for like a litre thing. Yeah. Because I was just so like I just wanted sugar, and I didn't know why. As soon as I got home, it was just like load up on. Was this on medication when you're on meds? Yeah. So like you'd have your medication. I remember like early on in primary, I would sometimes fry it away. Like I wasn't a part of the program as such. Like I wasn't on board because I didn't know why I was having it. But then like I think teacher was noticed when I was on it, when I wasn't on it, and that feedback would come to my parents. So I was encouraged to sort of take it. So they would pick up on the little stuff, For sure. Yeah, and then so that meant when I got into like more of a consistency with having it, there was a big drop in appetite through school, and when I would come home, you'd have those sort of binging episodes where you'd just like eat till you had a bulge in your stomach, and then you'd go out running again. Yeah, I remember getting the Milo. It must have got moisture into the box, and it turned to like a toffee. Yes, I just stashed it under my bed. I just go under there and just break bits off, and because I was like my parents, they would not let me eat that if they found it. But we had the same staples, Raro, all that kind of stuff. And your brain was probably craving the dopamine hit, but also you needed the carbs. Yeah, really so like it was a 2-pronged thing from a nutritional or a food aspect. And then when I sort of look at like relationships into like intermediate and high school, that's when things change like quite a bit. When you're more aware of like your social hierarchy, and when you sort of fit in with your friend group, and attraction to the opposite sex, and just the sort of response that you're getting from that, and understanding that you're not yourself, you're medicated, and you don't know sort of why, and you wonder if people know, or these are sort of scenarios that sort of run through your head. And I ended up going from Heaton to Boys High. Love my rugby. Was very successful at a younger age. But as I got older, like I was playing in sort of like underweight rep teams. Right. And so when I went into playing at Boys High at normal weight, it was like quite problematic, my body, getting a lot of injuries. Yeah, you would be. Because I've thrown myself I was in the forward pack at flanker and lock. Yeah. And when you didn't have the weight behind you, when you're very lean, it was a bit diabolical.
Yeah.
But especially when it came to the school environment at Boys High, it's very much a boisterous environment, and people look for like weaker targets.
Yeah.
And when you're getting like, I got quite badly bullied in my younger years because again, like all your peripherals are off, and you're just
tunnel vision.
Yeah. And then when people give like bait you or throw things or whatever, you're kind of like trying to stay in your zone because you're sort of tamed that. Whereas if I was off Ritalin, I'd want to like fight back and be into that.
Yeah, true.
And so that sort of made me more of a target.
Right.
And because of that, I went through some pretty bad bullying early on.
That sucks, because like your school, I'll touch on one thing just really quickly. I'll come back to that. That school period is where you are working out social dynamics and how to respond to them. As an adult, by the time you're in a workplace and you deal with that kind of stuff, you've kind of worked it out from school to a degree, But at school, you are developing those skills. And I think, like for me, taking Ritalin as an adult, I already know where to focus my attention to a degree. So I can filter out that. It's not so important now, I think, because I'm not dealing with schoolyard stuff. Because schoolyard stuff is almost like that lower emotional maturity stuff.
Correct.
If I was back in an environment with lower emotional maturity people, and trust me, I know some adults who fucking are, it would be like the schoolyard. It would probably be quite tough. But I think I've developed those skills as a teenager to deal with that. Now, if you're developing those skills while you're on that medication, it's almost like an inhibitor to you actually developing the skills to manage the chaos, because you're just, like you say, you can focus on one thing at a time.
Correct.
And I know, and I've said this on another episode as well, but when I went on the medication, my doctor said to me, just be aware this can impair driving. And I'm like, okay, how does it impair driving? He's like, I don't know. He said, and I was like, okay. I said, well, let's have a think about this. I was like, so it's a stimulant that's to make me focus, but it would impair driving. And then I was like, I thought to myself, when you're driving, you need to be easily distracted. So you need to be
hyper aware of your environment, so you can react accordingly if someone pulls out or stops and
walks across the road, anything. And so obviously Ritalin stops you from responding to the other stuff.
Correct. And so that's great if you're in a room that has, like, the teacher has a real hold on the classroom. But when you've got like 30 young boisterous kids that are like wanting to be cool and be sort of in charge, and some people don't, like, some people just go to, at that time, some people just went to Boys High for the rugby, like to eat their lunch. They weren't interested in the classroom. They're like, why do I have to be here? All they want to do is go far in rugby, and this is the team to do that. So you'd have like potentially like problematic kids in classrooms that were there to cause shit because they didn't really want to be there. And sometimes they came from homes that were like problematic. And so they were just letting out their sort of frustrations in the classroom. And so when you have that dynamic, and then you have someone that is under the influence and has his peripherals turned off, and it creates a scenario that is very easy for that person to be attacked or bullied. And unfortunately that sort of took hold. And so that, I guess, attached a layer to like, I don't want to be on this drug. I want to be able to be myself and defend myself and be aware of things that are coming, as opposed to being tamed or subdued. Because
being exactly the same reason a tiger in a zoo, among other tigers that aren't sedated, would feel. You know, imagine that.
And so in terms of like earlier feelings about Ritalin, it was quite negative, because you have this thing where you're like, oh fuck, I'm underweight, or I'm noticing that boys around me are bigger, and then that's a problem with potentially the caloric intake that I'm having, and then you have that environment where you're more susceptible to people that are disruptive, and also, like, I guess in intermediate, when there was females and stuff in the classroom, you're as confident because you're off kilter.
I can understand that. I was going to say before too, girls who get put on birth control, at a young age, it's been, again, I'm not going to quote any studies, but like it has been shown to affect, and there is a lot of concern in there as to how it affects their perception of males. That they're taking synthetic hormones. Yeah, it does. It's the hormone levels change, and so there's a lot of discussion around whether it affects their taste in men, how they, what they prioritize, all these kind of things. A lot of women who come off birth control in their 20s or when they want to conceive, for example, suddenly go not attracted to their husband.
Yeah. That's really interesting, yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, imagine that. I mean, like with Ritalin, for example, you're on a stimulant that has managed you as a child, but then suddenly you're going through puberty, and your risk reward is all around other things. You're thinking about your dopamine hits are coming from,
and it's really hard to understand that. Like, I know that my parents were acting on the information that they had at that time, and they were doing sort of the best for me.
Yep.
But I did not understand what was sort of going on and how that, because there's that relationship that you're obviously like a child. So on what level should you know the side effects of that drug? Should you know how it's going to make you feel?
Yep.
I don't feel like I was a part of that conversation, or I was at an age to understand.
Yep.
But I feel like how we parent now in terms of what people recommend to do is so different in terms of how you have your child a part of the conversation, and you treat them with the respect to be able to make decisions around this.
Yeah, there's less of a disconnect now.
Yeah, there's obviously there's an authority aspect but there's that person is closer to your level.
Yeah, absolutely. Like even my son, he sits at the table now when I talk to my grandparents about things that I've talked to my grandparents about, and we've joked about the fact that if that was 30 years ago, he would have been asked to leave the table, or he would have, it's not while the adults are talking. Yeah, absolutely. And it's stuff that and again, with his medication, he gets a thorough debrief. But like I was going to say before, it sounds like your parents did a fantastic job of managing things, but then there was things that couldn't be managed by them, like whether you ate your lunch or not.
Correct.
And it's for you're just not hungry. You don't want to force feed yourself. It sucks. And I know that from having a fast metabolism my whole life, I just did not, and I didn't prioritize eating. When I had to force feed myself, it sucks to actually have to do that, to put weight on. You just don't end up doing it. And it's like, if they could have tightly controlled that, maybe you wouldn't have been as underweight when you got to high school.
Potentially, yeah.
But also the education around it might have helped too. Like, and again, you can't have a fear of being underweight unless you know what being underweight feels like.
Correct. And it's one of those. It's really complex, because as a child you sort of going on your gut feel.
Yes, and you have to. Yeah, it's all you've got.
Yeah, and so all you know is that you don't have a hunger cue. You're not hungry, and because of that, the byproduct is you don't eat.
Yeah. And you don't want to get in trouble, so the food disappears.
Yeah, so you sort of keep that quiet.
Yeah.
And then when you get home, you don't know why you're so hungry. You just sort of
you are
you
just are,
and you're just trying to fill that void.
Yeah.
And then that can have its sort of own problems.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's quite a complex thing. And then obviously with that classroom environment, they can only get sort of feedback from the teacher, from what the teacher sees, and they might ask you how your day is or what have you been up to. And as a kid, you try and be cool, and you sort of just give them like the bare minimum.
Yep.
And
they've got to manage 30 other kids.
Yeah.
You're only getting a smidgen of their attention, even if you do have a disorder that needs to be monitored. It's like they can only give you so much.
For sure. So I can easily see sort of how it took place, but what sort of takes hold from that when you fast forward is a negative connotation to that drug in terms of relationships with like friend groups.
Yep.
Relationship with yourself with food. It's the reason why you're underweight and why you're getting a lot of broken bones or potential concussions by putting your body on the line with bigger boys.
Yeah.
And then as well as that you're not yourself under it. And it's and like my understanding of it now is it's a tool to support your weaknesses.
Yeah.
And you can sub it in and out. But back then it was kind of like just painted over the school experience, and then that had like a cost.
It's almost like how people would view steroids in society. They'll think it's this drug that's going to make them superhuman, and often you do put weight on and you're stronger and everything else. It's almost like subconsciously you're viewing the drug as the opposite. It's like something you take that makes you weaker or, lower weight and these kind of things. So you would see it as like, oh my God, I'm taking this thing daily that's disadvantaging me in so many ways.
Yeah. And so my experience with coming back in a roundabout way to this question is like, it was negative when it came to the drug, and it was negative when it came to like, if it increased my attention span for certain subjects like English and social studies and stuff like this, like that was potentially helpful for that classroom, but it had like a real negative effect. So
overall,
it was hard.
Yeah. So just to further go back into the bullying and kind of teasing that happened because of the diagnosis, how specifically, or how did that affect your confidence in interactions with others being medicated for ADHD?
So in high school, it was quite severe.
Okay.
Mainly sort of, I think it was third or fourth form.
Yep.
Maybe my first year. And it was something that you don't really, because you're boys being boys, you're always sort of like playful, talk shit, throw punches. That's boys just being boys.
Yeah.
But where it's sort of like cross the line is when you don't fight back and it doubles down and it gets worse and worse.
People
and worse.
see you as someone they can prove themselves against.
Yeah. And for like who I am today and how I look and physically, all the rest of it, complete parallels where I'm just a petite, underweight kid that loves playing rugby, getting amongst it, but is a bit of an easy target because he's quiet in school. And I remember with these like heaters downstairs, and when like old school metal heaters that had water that one ran through them.
Yep.
And I remember one morning my dad coming downstairs and I was just sobbing against it, and he was kind of like, "What's wrong? Like, what's going on?" Because I've somewhat been brought up in an environment as well where you didn't really talk about your emotions. You kind of you don't show sort of weakness.
Yeah.
You work things out yourself, and it got to the point where it was really affecting me, and that's where things sort of changed in terms of like it actually being brought up to like the headmaster or my year 9 dean or whatever, and then something being done about that. But it had like quite a big effect on my early years of high school and how I felt about why I have to take this drug and what it's doing.
Right. Do you think, and I mean, I know from my personal experience anyway, not to do with the drug, but to do with being underweight. For me, you talked about being parallel or polar opposite to what you were. For me, I was underweight. I was 63 kilos at 6'1". That motivated me to train, to get bigger, to get stronger, to be a different person. Do you feel like these experiences motivated you to make that change?
Absolutely, from the aspect of like, so I remember, I think it was like Form 2 intermediate, I was playing under 48 kg rep rugby. So, and I didn't get my like height to later into high school, but it definitely planted the seed in terms of like not being enough, not being heavy enough. Yeah. So not being enough for my position to, because when I'd sort of make the first up until I think fifth form, and then I started getting into the seconds. I wasn't in the starting lineup,
right? And
then usually it wasn't across like my ability with the ball for my position on the field. I didn't have the weight in the tackles, and I was being knocked around.
Yep.
And so it's really sort of cemented in my mind that I need to be bigger, I need to be stronger, I need to be more powerful at the breakground to do the thing that I love, to go far with it.
Yeah.
Because I grew up loving rugby, like it's a religion within New Zealand. You'd get up at like 3-4 a.m. to watch South Africa play the All Blacks. You get out your wheat bix. Like I was very like traditional sort of family life around sports, and just having like dreams and admiration to wanting to be like a Crusader or an All Black. So that was everything to me in my early years of high school. Like I went to Boys High for the rugby.
Right.
And so when it came down to in young teenagers sort of starting to get like a lot of injuries and not making sort of those first teams, it sort of really propelled me to be like, I need to eat more, I need to train more. Why am I not where I need to be?
And you had that association with the medication at that point?
Yeah, so I didn't, it's almost like when you have a problem, you start to work back from it.
Yeah.
And you're like, why am I underweight?
Yeah.
And then it's like, how do you put weight on? And it's like, I eat heaps. Like I ate so much for dinner. I ate so much for breakfast. And then it's like, oh, what am I doing at lunchtime?
Yeah, nothing.
Nothing. Like I'm not eating for 6 hours. Like
yeah.
I'm almost doing a planned fast, but I don't understand why, because you start to work back from that program. And I can remember it wasn't till like 16 or 17 that I started to do something about that. I think my parents encouraged me we organised trying to see like a nutritionist somehow. And at that time it was like eat creamed rice, a can of creamed rice, drink like chocolate milk, like 2 litre of chocolate milk, or just like crazy carbohydrates, because it was all about pasta and carbs. Yep. And I just remember it made me feel like more lethargic and tired and just like, I don't know if I can do this.
It's like mass gainer. When you buy mass gainer, it's just protein powder with sugar added to it. Like, and I know that when I was trying to put weight on when I first started training when I was 18, 19, 20, around there, it was, the shakes we were making ridiculous. It was full tins of cream rice all the time, and like, making shakes with like 7 egg whites and chocolate milk and ice cream and all this shit. It's just like,
dude, my go-to as like an 18, 19-year-old was like, it got up to about 3.5 cups of oats, right? But banana, peanut butter, protein powder, 500 mils of milk, and I'd blend it up to, it was at the top of this like 1.25 litre like frothed up smoothie. Yeah. And I would chug the whole thing. Yeah. Like straight after my workout.
That's 2 meals.
Yeah. It was like ridiculous amount of calories. Like it's probably getting in like 1,000 or 1,500 calories or something like this.
In one shake.
And it was just because it was blended up, I could get it in. But that was sort of later on. But the early seed were planted in school that you weren't big enough. Yep. And then how that sort of transformed into you finding a way to eat more and put yourself on a 5,000 calorie diet as a teenager.
Yeah, I wish I had, or I wish I'd known more about nutrition back then. So it does, from what you've said so far, it sounds like your parents are very supportive.
They were,
which is fantastic. Like so good.
Yeah, it was a massive thing from the aspect of trying to work out your problems.
Yeah. Cool. So what point did you stop taking your ADHD medication, and what was it that kind of led to that decision?
So through high school, like I had this sort of split from my peer group, which was quite hard. And I think it was more around that whole thing of like who I was like at school versus who I was in the weekend and after school. Mm-hmm. So with that, I'd sort of like formed different friend groups through rugby clubs and different schools and through like sporting aspects, and I wasn't enjoying school. Like I wasn't enjoying school from the aspect that I felt like I didn't have that connection with a good friend group there. I felt that that I didn't like being in that setting where I wasn't inspired or I hadn't found like a hyper focus towards something. Yep. It was like going through a factory mantra of turning up to a job that I hated with people that didn't inspire me and people I didn't feel connected to.
Yeah, true.
And so I would think of any reason not to go to school. And a strength of ADHD is problem solving and thinking out ways to sort of get around it. And I was brought up in an environment with a mum that worked in intensive care. So she was very good at reading people's sort of health and where they're at. Yeah. And so for me to get a sick day, I would have to present a fever that was like through the roof or show her my vomit and be like, this came out of me. I'm not well. And so I would think of all these sort of elaborate ways where I'd get a hot water bottle and put that next to like she'd leave the room while I'd put in a thermometer into my mouth and put that next to the hot water bottle, or ways in which to try and get out of going to school.
Wow,
as a sort of a teenager or going to the sick bay, which it seems like so stupid now. But at that time, it was just because I wasn't enjoying myself and it made it really sort of challenging. So when I was able to, at sixth form, I after sixth form, I decided to sort of see the careers advisor, look at my strengths, and I was very good with like maths and PE, and so that led to thinking that I should go into a trade like quantity surveying.
Cool.
So I went to the Polytechnic for my seventh form year, rather than going through another year of school.
Right.
And I went down that route, and
it's quite a good way to do it, eh? Just do your last year of high school as a specific thing.
Yeah, and it wasn't, again, I fell into the similar traps of weaknesses and strengths, and it being like problematic, but it sort of led me on to going like into a pre-trade after that, into a different aspect of the building industry.
Cool.
But it was as soon as I could leave high school, I did. And the last few years, I just didn't really want to be there because of how I was in high school.
Yeah, it's fair enough. I completely understand that. So you were off medication at that point?
So when I went to the Polytechnic, I was.
That's when you came off?
Yeah.
So how did that, how did you manage your symptoms after that, or like especially as you transitioned into that?
I did. Like,
did they need to be managed?
As in like, it was almost like it was a bad dream, and I just like tried to forget about it. And
so you were perfectly capable of doing all the work at Polytechnic.
I drowned.
Right.
I struggled. Okay, I like assignments were late, overdue.
Oh, that was the bad dream.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or the bad dream was essentially like having to take medication, having to see like reader writers, having to go through that. When I had the opportunity to get off, I did.
Yeah.
And then I just struggled really bad.
Okay, right.
And because like it was this, I guess like there's a shame or guilt or negative association with it, and just wanting to be normal. And so like as soon as I had the opportunity to, I was like, I've got this. But in reality, I didn't know anything about ADHD or how it works. How to manage it. And so it became problematic, and subsequently I didn't go forward with quantity surveying after a year, and I went into doing like a pre-trade, which was a little bit more hands-on. It was something that I could take to. Did
your parents try and were they involved at that point? Were you
they were in the aspect of like asking questions or checking in, but I guess that they were sort of wanting me to be my own adult and sort of make adult decisions and make mistakes. And
I think that's really healthy.
Yeah.
That's probably exactly the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And it gave you a taste of how it felt to be off medication, and also the motivation to change your own patterns and behavior if you could, as well.
And so it was quite eye-opening to understand why I was having it and how it was having effect. And that environment probably would have been better to be on it, because the people in there are adults and they are wanting to have a positive change. So the schoolyard sort of bullshit wasn't there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And also probably by that point too, the stigma was starting to be reduced, was it?
It was one of those things where it was literally only in later life, when a lot more information has been available today or talked about, and you realise that there's actually quite a lot of people that have it. Back then it was still like I just wanted to forget about it.
It's probably since social media, I'd say, that's when a lot of things changed.
When you feel connected to a larger audience and you have people talking about particular topics that you're like, I've got this. Oh, shit, heaps of people got this.
Yeah, but they talk about it in a different way. Like, like you say about we were talking about what was it? Like pop culture around
memes.
it. Yeah, all that stuff makes it suddenly potentially entertaining in a way that we can relate. So we're like, oh, that's so me. You see these reels and you're like, I know what that feels like.
It's a weird one though, like, because then that pendulum swings into a space where everyone attributes today like an aspect of ADHD. We're like, oh, that's just my ADD brain, and it's like, have you been diagnosed, or is that something you've gone through? And they're like, nah, I just saw like a Instagram reel, and that's me.
That's what that means though, is it's becoming acceptable in the in-group.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like the majority suddenly has it sprinkled everywhere, rather than no one's talking about it unless you are that disruptive kid that's snapping things and throwing stuff and climbing the tree with the scissors. ADHD suddenly, or ADD even, is not the kid climbing the tree with the scissors only. It's 1 in 5 of us.
Yeah.
You know?
Or more, yeah.
And saying that, I mean, at this point, it's probably more, it may be less, but like at the point where it was being talked about on social media for the first time, suddenly people are finding it acceptable in the in-group. And whether that person's diagnosed or not, they're like, that's procrastination, that's not eating, that's like doing the wrong task. For me, it was picking up and folding the washing when I was already 5 minutes late to somewhere because I was walking out the door and I was like, oh fuck, I need to do that. And that took priority. And so, if I did a little quick Facebook reel for that and I put it up, there's probably fucking so many people that'd be like, oh, I know that feeling, doing that thing.
For sure.
And that's like, whether I'm diagnosed or not, people who are suddenly, I could say ADHD and all the ADHD people would be like, that's like what I do, you know?
But I don't know. I feel like there's a real difference. I guess there is a spectrum in terms of where people fall into it, but there's some very clear traits that I think everyone on some level procrastinates, but what it can mean for someone with I hate victim mentality, but what it can mean for someone with ADHD, it can be very problematic.
Absolutely.
And so you really need to, it's not like, oh, you just don't want to do something. It's like you're not getting enough dopamine from that task to do it. So you're going to do everything and then you're going to feel like absolute shit about yourself because you haven't done that.
And then you're going to smash it out and
then you get it done and it's like, and people, you're potentially like, your parents or your peers, they just don't understand. They just think that he's just lazy or doesn't want to do that thing or whatever.
Yeah, we spoke about that when we caught up the other day, and I loved it because it's the first time I've heard anyone say it. You'll do it better, more justice than me, talking about how we create the high risk.
Chris.
So
I actually heard this from a podcast with Stephen Bartlett, Diary of CEOs, and he was talking to someone that was well versed with ADHD, and he was saying about when it comes to tasks that you need to complete, and when it's something that you don't want to do, that you don't associate dopamine with, you set yourself up in the environment where you leave it right to the last minute, where you have the smallest amount of time frame to complete it in, where the risk is so high because you feel the potential guilt or stress of having to not hand this thing in or talk to this particular person that's saying that you haven't done it. And that creates a threshold where you get enough dopamine to break through and actually start to do the task. And then you're like, why the fuck did I leave this to the last minute to get done something that I've been stressed about for a week or 2 weeks or this timeline? And it's a relationship between the hormone and us actually not being able to get enough of it for that particular task. And it's like, if we broke it down in a different way and had better systems, it would be a lot more manageable. But our natural instinct is to wait until we build up this threshold to completion before we have enough stress that triggers an adrenal response to get that dopamine.
Yeah, it's like it's stress either way, isn't it? Because it's like if we had to force ourselves through the task early on, it's like torture.
Yeah, it's dragging your feet.
You're like, I'm not getting anything from this. It's not enjoyable at all. And so you're so motivated to find something else to do that's enjoyable. But then you get to the point where you're so stressed that you're stressed the whole time completing it. And you get this relief at the end. Yeah. But it was all for that.
Yeah.
It was just all for the relief.
And when you understand the breakdown of that, it makes complete sense.
It does, yeah.
And it just speaks to, I think, that's for weaknesses that people have with ADHD and understanding the areas that you lack in, the things that you really struggle with, that we have to set up better systems to work with that.
Yes.
And understand that this is the default that will happen, and this is how bad you'll feel about something until you get to that threshold before you actually action it.
Yeah.
And I think, again, it's identifying a problem and working back from it.
Yes.
Yeah.
On that, how do you navigate challenges now? And do you have any kind of strategies that help you stay productive?
Yeah, so I definitely struggle today with admin.
Yeah.
And it's a big part of personal training or running your own business.
Yes.
And so to this day, I've even thought about re-engaging to get diagnosed again to have Ritalin to support something like that.
Yep.
But without it currently, I set and play. I'm really big on lists, so clearly defining what I have to do that day, so that I'm not managing multiple plates in my head of things that I need to do. I can actually clearly see it, define it, and then I can prioritize what needs to be done first in terms of like a hierarchy, and then I can tick those things off as I go. That's extremely helpful. And then there's accountability layers that you can attach to that, where you can de-incentivize yourself. We can attach a negative task that's even worse than that task.
Right, yeah.
Which for me, I'm not a big fan of running.
Yeah.
I much prefer sprints or gym work. But when it comes to like going for a jog for distance, and I've implemented this recently. It's been working really well. Where if I don't complete a task, I have to run a K for that task. And at the end of the week, I count up all those tasks, and then I've got a big run to do.
Is that what? Did I see David did something like that with $100?
Yeah.
As well?
He actually he passed it on to me with the financial aspect, and I mentioned it to my girlfriend, and she was like, I don't want you paying me money.
No.
Like, so what else do you not like to do? And that's where like running came up. And subsequently I went for an 8K run last week.
Eight times.
Eight tasks that didn't get done. And I've been pretty good for it this week, to be fair. I've got a couple Ks to do, but not to the same level. But a de-incentivizing you around a task that if you don't complete it, do something worse than that. And then the other aspect is incentivizing, which is doing something that you enjoy doing once you've done. So those two things are really good. Speaking with your partner or a friend or a family member, and having them aware of what you're trying to do, that layer of accountability, that you have someone that isn't your minder, but they're supporting you in that process. Because it's like, ultimately we should have great sort of teams around us or levels of support. So just finding someone that you trust and love, and speak to them about something you're trying to do, and to add that in. I feel like that's really helpful. So I definitely implement lists. I tried de-incentivizing, incentivizing. I talk to people about what I'm trying to do. And that's extremely helpful, because without that, it's just chaos.
I know. My last relationship, she's a wonderful person, but diagnosed ADHD as well, probably more severe than me. Well, without a doubt, more severe, and younger too, quite a bit younger. So she was prescribed medication but wasn't taking it. And when I was trying to study and we were here, she just needed my attention often, and it was the opposite. As it was so hard for me to not procrastinate and not get distracted and not prioritize other things that would actually bring me more satisfaction in the moment. For the long-term stuff that I really battle with anyway. And it's been great since we've split in that aspect. I mean, it was
almost like more problematic when she was there.
It was far more problematic. And although that problem's gone, a fucked up aspect of the breakup is that I crave the old chaos because it was satisfying. Like there was lots of problems to solve right now, all the time, and that was.
Well, you feel useful.
I did. I was, and I found that my life really took on a support role for her more than anything else. Like literally 50% of my time, which contributed so significantly to the breakup and how hard it was for me.
And that's a great perspective, that you can look from a sort of a bird's eye view and understand the dynamics of it. But I think it also speaks to the volume that I'm in the fitness industry working with people, and you're wanting to be a psychologist and help people. And something that is very clear in my role is I see problems very easily. I can identify from holding space for people to talk, and I want to help, and I want to hear them, make them feel heard, and then be able to find those solutions from my strength that I've developed in problem solving. And that's immensely valuable skill for the people that I work with, and subsequently it will be for you, because we get dopamine from that.
Absolutely.
And so we're drawn to it. So it means that there's a passion there.
Absolutely.
And like, although as hard it is to reflect back on your relationship and how much of a support person you were for her, you can sort of see that it was potentially at your own detriment for the career pathway and the changes that you want to make to your life. And in the long run, you'll be able to do that for other people, not just your partner.
That's such a good observation. I love that. I mean, like, yeah, although it was a detriment to the studies I need to do, you know, and the long-term progression, it was so instrumental in me learning about myself and what was important to me.
Yeah, because it's your why. It's that fundamental of like why you want to do what you want to do.
And look at your problem-solving nature too with you when you needed to have a sick day.
Yeah,
you know, like that's the problem solving that you apply to your clients. When you want to achieve something, when they want to achieve something, you're like, right, how are we going to make this happen?
Correct. So it allows you to, because I think a lot of, and it's something that's like university definitely allows you to explore this, but within the school system, not so much. When there's an A or B, getting from A to B and figuring out the route there. And I think with someone with ADHD and problem solving, they can take a completely different pathway to achieve that problem that no one was aware of.
Yeah.
And that is a solution, but it's not something that's set up for that test environment.
Yeah. Have you heard about vertical and lateral thinking? Have we talked about that?
No, I don't think we've talked about it. We've heard a little bit about it.
Okay, so lateral, there's two different ways to think. And if you think about it like looking for buried treasure, vertical thinking is digging the same hole deeper, and lateral thinking is digging new holes. And sometimes to solve a problem in a situation, it involves one or the other. For example, iPhones. So the cell phone is now in a space of vertical development. You know what I mean? In terms of how it's being developed, it's just the same hole.
Next version
is getting dug deeper.
Yeah.
Whereas if we were thinking about ways to communicate with each other, we would start thinking of other ways to do the same thing.
Correct.
And there's not much more efficient than a cell phone.
Well, they thought about that. Zuckerberg thought about that a little bit with his glasses in terms of like
exactly.
But it's
really just all the same thing.
Yeah.
But it's
lateral thinking.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is people with ADHD are often quite good at lateral thinking.
Yeah.
And we come up with solutions that aren't something that other people would consider because other people are kind of drawn to the solution that exists. And for us, that's boring.
Yeah.
That already exists.
Yeah.
You know, what about some other ways to do this? Like, you know.
And you think about that from a business aspect, like that's an extremely valuable creative tool.
Massively. Yeah.
That is really under-resourced. Everyone can think the same. It's so much valuable if you can think in a different way.
Yeah, that's right.
So it's just highlighting a sort of a strength and a weakness and then applying that to your relationships. But it's always very hard when there's obviously like big emotions involved.
And this flows perfectly into this next question too. You've mentioned ADHD can come with these strengths and weaknesses. What are some strengths that you've discovered in yourself aside from what we just spoke about? And I guess I guess we have just talked about this. Are there any other strengths?
Yeah, there's a lot. So the big one is hyperfocus.
Yeah. And
hyperfocus is a freaking superpower.
Yeah.
And this would have made like such a difference for me as a kid because to this day I can remember a scenario where after seeing a psychologist, I came home, I was given Ritalin and there was a lounge and a glass window pane and my mum looking through this pane at me at the computer desk and just seeing like how I was reacting under it. And so much I felt in that moment probably being like a guinea pig being like, how should I react? How should I be feeling?
Sounds like an experiment.
But if she had came to me and said, you're different in a positive way, you've got a superpower and we're going to find out what your strengths are. And when you find your strength, you're going to take over, you're going to excel. And for me, I had to work that out the hard way and it took a long time for me to find my industry. But within health and fitness, there was something in me where I struggled with every reading report I ever had in school. If I had to read a book, I'd read the blurb on the back. I'd Google like information. I would speak to people. I'd find out any way to complete the report
without reading
the book. So, but when it came to exercise, biology, when it came to nutrition, I just had this endless reserve to read articles, speak to people, like sit down, read a medical book, and no one could have paid me to do that. and I wouldn't accept the money. Like I was just not interested. But when it came to finding the thing that I had a general interest for, I had a hyper focus that I had never felt before. And this allowed me to like hold and retain endless amounts of information around nutrition, mechanics, systems that I now use in my day-to-day job, and people are like always sort of amazed about. Or like, how do you know this about that particular name of muscle, or how that like works and how I should be feeling? How did you work that out? I've been with many trainers that haven't seen this, and it's just because it's like you're understanding your hyper focus with your passion, and when you align with that, it can be a superpower, and it can separate you from your peers.
I found that with because obviously for me, I have a checkered history of lots of different illegal activity, and a lot of it was around substance use or manufacture or sale. And when it came to looking at the science behind problem solving, the science behind the like substance manufacture, for example, I was like, I'm going to work out how to do this, and if I'm going to do these things that other people haven't done yet. And I did that. And then I was successful at that. And because of the rewards associated with it, financial and also the sense of utility that I had, I did it well, and I was known for doing it well. It was just a shame it was illegal. But again, that boosted the risk for me. And when I was young, it didn't consciously boost the risk for me. I'd rather the risk wasn't there, don't get me wrong. But when I was a kid, the only things I wanted to do carried risk, really. Like the things I was motivated to do, it was like taking my mum's car out, or getting on the roof, or skateboarding in places where we shouldn't be, or riding my bike down that trail that's not really meant to be ridden down. Driving the car in places where I shouldn't have been driving it. All these things, and even when I got my firearms license, modifying weapons to see if I can make that full auto.
For sure.
And I did,
it's that risk-seeking behavior. And it's associated with that low baseline of dopamine that people commonly have with ADHD.
Any of those,
and like I can completely relate. I've fallen out of more trees than I've got fingers and toes. I've jumped out of moving vehicles. Been bollocked by my granddad for doing so. I've like rolled motorbikes. I've bitten through my tongue. I've broken more bones than I have fingers, just because I've put myself in situations of risk. Because I was inherently drawn to it. I wanted to take that. And it puts you like in a space where that can be seen as problematic behavior.
I mean, it is if it's going to affect your life negatively and the others around you.
But I think there's that big piece of understanding that could be obtained to adult to a child, and understanding that these are things that you're going to be drawn to. And these things that I need you to be aware of, and to see if you can potentially decide to take a different pathway when you enter that environment. Because you're like a magnet to it. And we know that we can, inherently we're drawn to it, but we know that with a level of understanding and trust and awareness, that when that behavior presents itself, we might be able to pick a different pathway.
I'm hyper aware of it with Flynn. He's less risk prone than I am. He doesn't get pulled into the same stuff I do, but he is now wanting to explore abandoned buildings. And I did lots of that. I got taken home by the police multiple times. I got arrested, for doing that kind of stuff when I was a kid. And nowadays I think it's a bit different. It's more likely he'll come across a crackhead who sees him as a resource for his phone than he will the police sometimes in some of these buildings. And I shouldn't actually refer to them as crackheads. I've just been on a course where that was not the right thing, not the right term. Some kind of substance addict, some kind of addict. But what I was going to say was about any one of those tasks that I talked about. Any one of those tasks that I talked about, climbing on roofs, all the way up to manufacturing drugs as an adult, I was hyper-focused.
And in reflection, it is sad and it's hard that those were like illegal traits.
But like you, for you, hyper-focus came into, you talked about in the fitness industry. I'll tell you now, I'm still so obsessed with science that when it comes to listening, I could listen to a podcast on space for 4 hours. I couldn't listen to a podcast on business.
I just commonly do that. I'll listen to a podcast when I'm working out, when I'm driving. Like I don't listen to the radio. Like no. It's something that
it has to be something you're interested in though.
Unless I've And it's been problematic in even like personal relationships with like girlfriends and stuff in the past, and understanding like communication and emotional intelligence, and these are sort of, I feel like someone with ADHD generally, because they're prone to making mistakes, they're really good at, and strength is learning from them.
Yep.
As we almost have to make our bed the wrong way before we actually understand how to make it the right way. You have to make that mistake. You have to spill the milk.
Yeah, that's right. We're used to making them.
Yeah.
And we generally don't learn until we make them.
Yeah.
Because we're going to do whatever we're going to do. It doesn't matter what anyone else says. But also when you make them, you're critically embarrassed, when you actually make it, because you feel like all eyes are on you, and that it was expected. I did anyway, like it's like it was coming. People are like, yeah, of course you did. My dad was, I almost, with my dad, if I look back, he's great, don't get me wrong, great parent, but whenever I would suggest things to him as an adult, early adulthood, in my early 20s, right through my 20s actually, I'm thinking about, doing this, he's like, oh, you would do that, wouldn't you? It's just almost a bit passive aggressive, like he's kind of like, oh yeah, that's something. He's thinking in his head, I would never consider doing that, but yeah, of course you would, Josh. And it was like this. It was because he was more responsible. He was the youngest. He wasn't ADHD. He was given the car by his parents, whereas I was getting a key cut. Yeah. And I was pushing it out quietly. It took me 10 minutes to open the garage door. Yeah. And whereas he was allowed to do that, but he wasn't taking it out at 1 a.m. Yeah. So I think like. I was expecting to disappoint these people, and I was expecting to be in trouble, and I was expecting all that stuff. So yeah, sorry, I've kind of digressed, but
no, but I see where you're going, and I think as you get older, you become more comfortable with yourself in the aspect of knowing yourself, and knowing that the things that you're interested in and you're driven towards, as long as they are like healthy or productive, the person like your parents or your father, they don't have to fully align with it, because you're your own person. Yep. And that comes with a level of sort of acceptance. Like I know that we are both sort of driven a lot towards personal growth and constantly curious about learning. Yep. And for a lot of people, it's really easy to see, and people are just happy with their baseline. Like they might want to be financially more secure, or driven to like promotions, but they're not on a quest of knowledge. They're not trying to like learn more. And I know for me that definitely is the case, is that constant curiosity is just there, and it doesn't die off, and that doesn't really make sense to my folks.
No, I wondered too if ADHD would indicate statistically a lot of ADHD people are more introspective. Like they analyze their own thoughts more and things. I mean, it doesn't mean you're capable of making change all the time, but like, sure. You're motivated to understand yourself.
Well, you're used to, especially if it's identified or it's recognized, you're used to being like watched or observed.
Yeah, true. So maybe it's really...
And you're conscious of how you're reacting.
Yeah, I think a lot of people who are high in ADHD score high in they would score high in like self-presentation in terms of caring about it. Yeah. I mean, you might, as a kid, you might not, but I think when you care about how you come across to others, you can modify yourself to meet certain environments and people and things like that. I'd say, I don't know.
It's a funny one, because like for me, that really like broke down when I moved to Melbourne, and the industries that I sort of worked in there. It allowed me to, and even relationships that worked and failed, it allowed me to learn the lesson that your relationship with yourself is most important in terms of your mental health and well-being. Yep. And that people's opinions of you or influence over you isn't going to change that. And so for us, there's a strength in knowing yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that it's so important that you get to that place, because when you come from a place of being constantly absorbed and understanding like how you're interacting and stuff like this, like allowing that spotlight to go away and just sort of like being content with yourself and knowing your direction is a real powerful thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think I'm definitely I've been committed to personal growth as long as I can remember. really. And I'm wondering how many people actually are.
I think it's, I think it's, from what I've seen, it's a common thing amongst people that I've come into contact with ADHD.
Yeah.
And in different industries, that's not the case.
No. Yeah, true. Okay, so for those who may be navigating ADHD, whether they are parents, children, or newly diagnosed adults, what advice would you give? And how can they understand and manage the condition while also recognising the unique strengths that it can bring?
So I think that's an interesting question in the aspect that I think it's very age appropriate. So for example, if you're speaking to like a child that's recently diagnosed with it, it's treating them, like from my experience, it's treating them as an adult and being very open about the strengths and weaknesses. I think it's a very positive it's a very positive mindset, optimistic mindset to speak to the strengths that come with it.
Yeah.
Almost like, dare I say, leading with a shit sandwich, where you've got this big middle piece that is all the powers that come with it, and really speak to that being a real benefit.
Okay.
But being a realist and saying that there are some weaknesses, and these weaknesses can potentially make you feel less.
Understanding what those are.
Understanding what those are and trying to do your best to find what system would work best to work through them.
Yep.
But then heavily focusing on those strengths and trying to explore them. It's so important that I think children get the opportunity to try multiple sports, get the opportunity to try multiple subjects. As a parent, be aware of what they're interested in, and when they find that, double down on it. Like, because that like when we think of adults and when we choose careers that we want to work in, like you're almost observing your child like taking to something that they love. And you just need to embrace that because they will excel at it. And if you sort of speak to them from a positive aspect that this is a superpower that you have and you're going to excel in it, it's going to change that entire framework in their head and how they feel about themselves. But just with those weaknesses, being a realist and being like, we need to put some systems in place. And this is something that potentially we'll struggle with, but together we're a team and we're going to work it out. When it comes to a teenager, I think it's understanding the social implications. That was something for me that was quite heavy in terms of
the social implications of being medicated,
and how that all influence your peer group. Because it does create real changes. You need to be aware of how you are on that said medication, and if you have the trust or love in your friends, being able to share that. If that's something that you're not comfortable with, you need to work out a way that you can be yourself or be authentic, or find those friends that you can actually talk to or let them know that you are under the influence. I think that would be like a supporting arm for a teenager. And as an adult, I think it's a completely different discussion. It's like, okay, let's be real. What do you suck at? How do we get better? Okay, is this medication going to be helpful? What do you want to do? If you're feeling like depressed, if you're feeling like low, if you're feeling like you can't achieve something, like again, like the child, let's explore new opportunities. The reality is most people have 7 careers in their lifetime. Like, because you failed at the first 3 or 4, it doesn't mean that you haven't found that right thing yet. Like, there's still time for success. There's still time for happiness. There's still time for passion. Passion sells passion. If you find out what you love, you're going to excel in it and people are going to feel it. So if you're not happy with where you're at and you feel like there's things that you can't get right, look to speak to your doctor, look to potentially get some medication for that, or again, find levels of accountability. If that's like a mentor that you need in your life, if that's a friend that you need to be honest with and get some support in, like reach out. Like, communication brings people together. A problem shared is a problem halved. Like we need to be open around our weaknesses and our strengths, because that's the way forward. So that's how I see that there's multiple layers from sort of like childhood to being adult when it comes to ADHD and how we navigate it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really, really good advice. I think, like, as an adult, when I was diagnosed and I spoke to my doctor, he said he's had people that have come in their 70s, 80s that have got diagnosed. not to be medicated, but just to know. And that they've spoken to a psychologist and stuff. And one of them, but he's also had people that have come in and thought that getting diagnosed and getting on medicated would help her finish her doctorate. And it didn't. Like it didn't. But she thought it would make her finish her doctorate.
It's hard to answer, right? Because to someone it can be really helpful, and to other people it's not going to make any difference.
That's right.
But it's understanding the biology of what you're lacking and the environment that it's going to put you in under the influence, and that might be helpful. You can speak from your own account that with your medication use it's been extremely helpful.
Yep.
But for this particular person that might not be the case, and that's like anything, right? There's no cookie cutter approach, but we do need to have this person might really benefit from incentives or de-incentivizing things, putting harder tasks next to things.
Yeah.
It's trying to figure out what works for you.
Yep.
But I think we need to be open that there is a real difference, a neurodivergence from how your brain operates to other people that are trying to complete their doctorate.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the key point there. Understanding the difference.
Yeah.
And then where your limitations or strengths are.
Correct.
And playing to those strengths and I guess, or working with them, and then understanding how to bring those limitations back up.
Yeah.
Because medication may not be the answer. It might just be actual like conditioning and, like you say, de-incentivizing or other techniques. I mean, for me, the medication, it's very, very evident to me that medication is not is not the solution. It's one piece of the puzzle, but there's a few others missing still. You know?
Yeah.
If the puzzle is efficiency and getting my life, progressing the way I want it to, as I want it to, and there's bits missing that are making that engine run a bit shit, needs to be tuned.
Yeah, it's an ingredient in a recipe.
Yeah,
like you notice it different.
Yep.
It can elevate, but it's really individual to like what you need or want.
There's still other problems to solve within that equation to get other knobs to turn to get that engine running just right.
Yeah.
And for me, I think a lot of that is actual behaviour modification.
Yeah.
And like you say, with that de-incentivizing, you're effectively just bringing in a positive punishment there. And again, you could have but the reason why I think it's so effective is because our whole lives we're taught to find the positive reinforcement. And with us, there's no reinforcement really for a lot of those tasks.
Yeah.
Whereas the punishment is something to fear.
Yeah.
You're like, oh fuck, okay, right, okay, I'll go. Because there's no carrot per se, but there is someone with a whip.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
That's the difference.
Correct.
Yeah. So what are you focusing on now? What's going on for you in your life? Where are you at, and what are you doing?
So my passion within the fitness industry is helping people.
Yep.
And with working in it for multiple years now, I've really recognized that time is a limitation in terms of how many people you can help.
Yep.
And when we look at like larger stats for New Zealand, we see that obesity is on the rise. 1 in 3 adults are obese. Within certain ethnicities, it's greatly worse.
Yep.
Within when it comes to habits with kids and food today, it's very like problematic. So I want to help as many people as I can, and so that's where I'm working with a business coach in the space of I'm wanting to work in events and more online.
Cool.
Because there's limitations when you work one-to-one, you can make a difference with that person. And
Absolutely.
I've seen it when you get that person results, that there's a ripple effect. So if you can do that at scale and say, take someone out of their thinking space for like a weekend, where you run an event where you start at 10, you work up to 100 and you go on from there, where you're reinforcing positive traits and how people can think differently and change people's perspective and story on themselves and educate people to make better decisions.
Yep.
This is where I want to be working. This is what I want to be doing. Is I'm loving personal training, working one-to-one, but at the same time, I'm working in a way to sort of to facilitate a bigger market to work on real problems that are metabolic diseases from people's environments. Like I want to educate people. I want to change people's story in terms of how they think of themselves and what they can do.
That narrative stuff.
Because we're we get so boxed into a limitation of what we think we can and we can't do. When you have someone around you that has that positive influence and that mindset that they can do so much more, there's so much more potential, that they start to believe it and change. So I'm starting to do events where I'm sort of taking small groups out to nature, doing a physical quest, education around sort of food, journaling, and mindset.
Awesome.
So that's the positive space that I'm working on.
Sweet.
And then at the same time, I'm loving personal training. I've always loved helping people, and so I want to grow that space more.
That is an awesome foundation to be working from that place. You know, you've already got a base of clients that want to work on themselves physically. And now you're just starting to fill the gaps in with everything else that they really need to holistically work on themselves.
So I've actually started my own podcast, which is pretty cool.
Nice.
Like I see real value in talking with people, especially high functioning individuals. I got into that from the space of wanting to initially just work with people with ADHD.
Yeah, nice.
And I'm going to thread that in throughout my talks, but I also wanted to speak to normies, to say, people that that are high functioning and found their passion and desire to make a change and difference, but don't suffer from ADHD. Like I think it's good to speak to a wider audience,
for sure,
and sort of seek out those people that are doing really well. Because I love, and I think there's real value in having a conversation, even from today, speaking with you.
Massively.
It's been so good to actually hear someone that wants to make a difference in their industry, and I've followed your journey through mutual friends and stories and all the rest of it, and you can see someone that's going out on a ledge to forge a different way from their upbringing, and that's a really positive thing, and you learn there's a value in that, there's a value in connection, there's a value in people that are wanting to make a difference and have a passion for it. So podcast called Purpose, working in events to a wider audience, and still working one-to-one with personal training.
Awesome. Well, what I'll do is I will put links to whatever you deem or where you want me to send people at the bottom. Like I can put links to the podcast and any contact details for you, the best contact details for you if people want to work with you.
For sure.
But yeah, I have loved having you on the show. It's been great. Like I said earlier, it's been awesome the way that we've, you know, I have a way of going off topic. Sometimes we'll talk about some particular thing and we'll come back, but you've been so good at circling back to finalising whatever it was that we were saying. And I think that what you've had to contribute has been so valuable. It's nice to have those opposing views on this, or not opposing views, but opposing experience on the same topic, but we've got the same views.
Juxtaposition.
It is. It really is. And I didn't even know what that word was until I started studying. But we have opposing life experience on an issue, but we have similar views. And that tells you something. You know what I mean? Like it's
and it shows the audience there's completely different experiences, and you can have a different feeling or understanding around a particular drug or a diagnosis and what that means. And it's important, overarching, that in both scenarios that we have a positive connotation with it now, and we're happy to be vulnerable and speak about the highs and lows, so that our short stories hopefully make a difference to show people that how they're potentially feeling, or the things that they're going through, trials and tribulations, they can find a way, or they can understand that they're not alone, and they can reach out to a friend, family member, mentor, whatever it is, to find their passion, because everyone has it, they just need to unearth it.
If there's one thing that I want to achieve from this podcast, it's just that. You know, give people that hope that exists.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. Well, thanks for coming on.
Pleasure, Brian.
And until next time.
Can't wait.